I love random encounters. I love random tables and using random tables for things. And over the years, I've come up with and I've discovered from the community, and I've picked up a whole bunch of different, what I'm going to refer to as advanced random encounter tricks. These are ways of using random tables and random encounters in order to make random encounters that are far richer and deeper and have layers of texture to them and lots of interesting ways that they interact with your characters and with your players and offering player agency. And I wanted to do a video where we just focused on those advanced tricks and put them all together into one place where you can find them all. This is going to parallel with a Sly Flourish article that I'm putting together on this very topic as well. So you can find a list of these available on Sly Flourish as well. So here is my list of useful tricks for getting the most value out of random tables. First, roll twice. When you have a random table or like a random encounter table that has like a bunch of different monsters on it, you can roll twice and then combine the two encounters together. You get to decide how these encounters combine together. Are these two groups that are working together? Are they two groups that are smashing against one another? Did one group defeat the other? You get to decide what it means to see these two random encounters together. But what I have found is often when you roll a single random encounter, it's kind of boring. But the minute you roll and add in another one, it becomes really interesting. And it's very simple to do. It's a great way to shake up your brain. It's a great way to come up with a completely unique encounter. It also makes your encounter table, somebody argued about this, I'm pretty sure, exponentially more valuable. That instead of like a 1 to 20 encounter table, now you got a 1 in 400, roughly 1 in 400. You can't get, if you roll samesies, it doesn't quite work right. But generally speaking, rolling twice and mixing the two results is really, really cool. Mix multiple tables together. So first of all, you have to find sources for multiple types of tables. And what are the kinds of tables that I find most useful? The ones I find most useful are the ones that I published in my own book, because if I didn't think they were the most useful ones, I wouldn't have published them in my own book. And that's in the Lazy DM's Companion. I also have them in the Lazy DM's Workbook, and they're available for free at the Lazy GM resource document, which you can find. And these type of extra tables that I often include often have like species, monuments, locations, effects, items, conditions, and descriptions, ways to kind of further describe what's going on. And you can layer these with your encounters. So monuments is a good one. Instead of just running into a bunch of goblins, you're running into a bunch of goblins that are around an old obelisk. And then if you roll a condition and it's like smoky, well, now you've run into a bunch of goblins that are lurking around a smoking obelisk. And then you roll like an effect, and maybe the effect is acid. Well, maybe these are weird acid goblins, or the goblins that coat their weapons in acid that are hanging around in the smoky mists around an old obelisk. Now you've got texture. Right now you've added detail. You've added things that can matter both for combat. You've added things that can just make the thing more interesting. Those work really, really well. So when you have those lists of sort of supplementary tables that sit alongside your random encounter, the ones that I really recommend are I call them the core adventure generators. They are available both in the Lazy GM resource document. They're also available if you subscribe to Sly Flourish in the free adventure generator that's available to newsletter subscribers. Absolutely free to sign up. You can find a link in the show notes. And also available here. And it's a bunch of different tables that are generally useful for lots of different things. But I have 6 tables in particular. Locations, monuments, and items. So you have things like cairn, tower, mansion for location. You have obelisk, orb, effigy for monument. Items are like bell or a bone or a circlet. And then condition, description, and origin. Smoky, acidic, bloodied, frozen, poison, or ruined, decrepit, obsidian, ancient, festering, golden, or human, elven, dwarven, elemental, giant, fiendish, and so on. And when you throw these layers onto it, your whole scenario kind of changes. This whole random encounter kind of changes by mixing in these different things. So that is a big tip that I have as well. Along with these multiple tables, I recommend creating and using a faction table. So a faction table is custom to you and your campaign. That even if you're running a published campaign, even if you're running something that someone else has put together, you can still know who are the major factions, who are the major gods, who are the major players that exist in your slice, your creation, your instance of this campaign, and build a list from that. And ideally, you want to have about 20 of these factions. Like they could be criminal groups, they could be major political players, they could be historic people from history. They could be gods. Like gods are a really easy one. And fill out a list of 20. Put a bunch of those things in there. And then along with your multiple tables, roll on that list. And now when you mix that with a random encounter, now there's another layer that connects those goblins to a god, or it connects these, these bandits are connected to a criminal group or whatever. You can sort of tailor make your encounter based on the factions that exist for your campaign specifically. That's not a list that I can give you, although I've created faction lists like this for things like Eberron and City of Arches and Midgard, but it really works best when you create your own faction list, ideally around 20 of these, and you can keep it for your whole campaign. You can change things in and out, and you can roll on that faction list when you're mixing your tables. Roll to see what came before. So a lot of systems have you roll to determine whether or not you're going to run into a random encounter, and sometimes you roll and nothing happens. And that means nothing happens at all. Like that means that you just go right to the next point. That doesn't have to be the case. Instead, you can roll a random encounter that occurred here previously. And again, you can mix this with the other tips that we have. So you can actually pick a monument that happened where all this stuff happened. You can add your conditions and descriptions and effects and stuff like that. And you can roll twice and say, an ogre ran into a bunch of bandits. The bandits are all dead. Parts of the bandits are missing because the ogre took it back to its lair to eat them. And there's stuff strewn about. And you can lay that situation out there without describing that an ogre did it. And now the players have an investigation they can do. Oh, what the hell happened here? There's a bunch of dead, crushed bandits, and parts of their bodies are missing. And there's these huge tracks, and the tracks are going off to the east, but we're heading north-south. I wonder what happened here. They're not in any danger because the ogre's already gone. The bandits are already dead. All this stuff already takes place. And now the players have agency to decide, do we want to go after that ogre? We know where it is. We know where it went. Or are we just going to keep going? We don't have to deal with it at all. Bandits are a bunch of dicks anyway. We don't need to worry about avenging the bandits, right? But maybe like, but these bandits were tied to this particular faction. I'll bet you if we can avenge these bandits, maybe we can get in good with that faction. Now, because of those other layers, you've created other interesting things that can occur, right? So mixing up those tables can again build these really rich tapestries of things. Monuments, I mentioned before, monuments being a really important element. That monuments, rolling on a monument table to add in where an encounter took place gives it some. Think about Lord of the Rings, the first Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring movie, when they're fighting off the Uruk-hai at the end. There's this weird ancient pavilion sitting there with a bunch of eagles on it. I'm sure there's some history there. I'm sure it's in the Silmarillion and I just didn't read it. But there's this place there. There's this ancient stuff there. There's meaning. He's fighting them off of these stairs on this place, right? They can't get to him. He's managed to use the terrain around him to create a choke point when he's facing these guys. That's really fun, right? It's interesting. There's a monument there and it means something, and they could learn secrets and clues by examining it. So add monuments to your locations, and now what you've created is a scene. You have an interesting location. You've got an interesting thing that catches the eye, that creates a vivid a vivid setting for your encounter, and then you get to mix in all these other things and do those encounters as well. So now we have a few that I'm going to call like old school techniques. These are ones that have been around since the oldest days, and largely because they came from like the wargaming side of things. But all of these can work really well, even if you're playing newer RPGs, newer sort of, heroic RPGs. These three roles still matter. The first one being attitude. Right? What is the attitude of the creatures that you might be facing? If you're running into a random encounter, maybe are they friendly? Are they hostile? You get to decide. If you don't have a table for this is one of these things I call tableless rolls, or where you don't need a table to roll against. And instead, you can just roll a die, and the higher the die, the more aggressive they are. If you roll a D6 and they roll a 1, they're pretty neutral, right? Or they're friendly. And you can decide, like, are they truly friendly or are they just neutral at that point? Or you roll a 6 and they're super hostile. You can shift that back and forth depending on the kind of encounter or the kind of situation and say, well, they might be friendly to, suspicious, or they might be neutral to totally hostile. Right? You can decide what you want that range to be. But an easy way is you just roll a die, and the lower the die, the more friendly they are, and the higher the die, the more hostile they are. But you can add that on top of all of these other ones that you have. Distance, how far away do you notice them? Some of this might be based on the characters and how well they do on a particular roll if they're scouting ahead and something like that. But you can also just roll a die, and the higher the die, the further away they are. On a 1, you don't notice them till you're almost on top of them. On a 6, they're pretty far away, and you can see them far far away. And that changes the agency of the players being able to engage with it or not, right? They get to decide what do they want to do if they see something from far away. Again, add this into all your other tables. Oh, we noticed that there's a bunch of goblins fighting some bandits. Do we just want to watch it play out? Do we want to see who wins? Do we want to help one side over the other? Can we learn anything about either group to decide whether we should do that? Now you've got options. You've got things that they can do. Activity. What kind of activities are they engaged in when you run into them? So there's a couple ways to handle this. Sometimes you can find activity tables for this. The Level Up Advanced 5e Monstrous Menagerie has an awesome set of activities per monster in the book. So you can look up the monsters. You can find what activities they're up to. You can roll a die and decide, are they scavenging for food? Are they sleeping? Are they engaged in other kinds of revelry? You get to decide what they're going to do. Another tableless way to do this is, again, you can roll a d6. And on the lower part of the roll, the more benign the activity. On the higher roll, the more frantic or sinister the activity. So bandits you could roll, and on a 1, they are hanging out playing cards or sleeping, right? They just camped out for the night. They're not really doing anything. On a 6, they are raiding there's a carriage, and they're raiding the carriage, and they're murdering people, right? You get to decide the intensity of the activity based on that die roll. I really like this idea of tableless rolls because you don't have to look anything up. You can just roll a die, and in your head you can decide. And the way that I do it is usually the lower the roll, the less extreme. The higher the roll, the more extreme. You can do that for weather as well. One I don't have on here is weather. All right, if you want to add weather, you can throw some weather on there, and now you have another layer that really creates a scene. So there's lots of stuff you can do there. The last thing I'll leave you with is this idea called the Oracle die. And the Oracle die is often used for solo role-playing games where you play on yourself. And the idea of an Oracle die is you ask a question and then you roll a die to see what way it's going to go. It's a way of adding a true stochastic element to your role-playing game, where the game can go in a different direction that you didn't expect by rolling on the die. And a lot of time it's based on outcomes, but other times you might roll a die to add all different kinds of layers. Iron Sworn is a fantastic role-playing game that has tons and tons of tables for your Oracle die that you can go look through. You can take some of those ideas and build your own lists from them. They are also available under Creative Commons license, so you can use them in different ways. But a lot of the ways that an Oracle die works is just to kind of make decisions. And you can say on a 1 to 3, this happens. On a 1 to 4 to 6, this happens. And then you can change the odds a little bit. On a 1 or 2, this will happen. On a 4 to 6, this will happen. And that way the odds are in a different way, but you're still rolling a die to determine what that outcome can be. So that idea of using an Oracle die, I think, can really work. So this was my, when I sat down to think about all of the advanced tricks particularly for random encounters. There's lots of other ways to use random tables for other things too, but specifically when we're talking about generating an encounter, what are all of the elements that you can use and that you can roll on? Would you use all of these? Maybe not. That's a lot of layers to have. But you might want to add a few layers here and there from time to time when you think like something needs to be spiced up a little bit. You can do things, add weird conditions, roll twice and have 2 encounters that mash up together, roll all these different things. And then that way you're creating truly unique, interesting, context-relevant encounters that can really make the game head in new directions that you would never think of before. So those are my thoughts for advanced random encounter tricks. Every month on the Sly Flourish Patreon, we have the Sly Flourish Patreon Q&A. Patrons of Sly Flourish can ask any question related to tabletop role-playing games. Every Friday, I sit down and answer all of these questions. Some of those questions come back here to the show so we can dive in a little deeper. Olivia says, I love the campaign arcs in City of Arches. I wonder how this question managed to make its way to the top of the list. I can't understand it. Who could really say? I love the campaign arcs in City of Arches. The level by level questing scratches an itch in my planning brain. My question is, there's also so many amazing story hooks in the City of Arches preview that I'd also love to incorporate into my sessions. How do you balance the campaign arc outline with side hooks and story quests without bogging down the pacing or getting off track on leveling? Really good question. So one of the ways that I do it, and there's a particular quest model that I really like, and you can find this in the City of Arches. I originally saw it in Dragon of Icespire Peak, which I think has a really good quest model that I like a lot. And I call it the 2 of 3 quest model. And the idea is that the characters are given 3 options for 3 quests that they're going to take. They pick one of those and complete it. And when they come back, there's the remaining 2 options are still there. They pick one of those options. And at that point, the third option goes away and 3 new options show up. So that means every time they go back to wherever it is that they are getting quests, and this might not even be the same place. It could be that these are quests they picked up in different spots, that they generally are 2 to 3 choices at any junction where they're ready to pick a new quest. And you're getting rid of quests that they're clearly not interested in. So they don't have to hang on to this giant log of quests. Those old quests are going away. So that's one way that you can kind of handle it. And you can handle the sort of side hooks and story quests that aren't part of the campaign arc in a few ways. One way that I'm probably going to do, I got this idea from your question when I answered it over on Patreon, was that you can sort of turn off the quests for the main arc for some time. I'm playing Cyberpunk 2077 right now, the RPG, cyberpunk role-playing game, Cyberpunk 2077. And they do this, where you'll reach a certain point in the story and it'll say, okay, it's going to take me time to go figure out the next part, go do other stuff. And then you have new quests that show up that they can do for side quests and other things. And then their main quest NPC, after a time, comes back and says, hey, I figured it out. I now know where the Blackfire Brazier is. We've followed the map, we've done it, and now I know the path that you can take to hit the next Blackfire Brazier. And that way, they can get some other stuff done. I'm going to do this in my own. My characters are getting ready to light the first of the 3 Blackfire Braziers. Once they do and they go back, they're going to say, well, what do we do next? And I'm going to have the quest NPC saying, well, we know that there are 2 of them. We're going to do some investigations of this, and I'm going to talk to the mages of Cartan and dig into the libraries, and we'll learn more information about where the other 2 actually are. In the meantime, here are 3 people that could use your help, or whatever, and then they can kind of do other things, do other quests for a little bit. But then your other question is about leveling. What do you do about leveling? Well, one way is slow it down. And you could say, like, so the City of Arches quest arcs, the campaign arcs in City of Arches all generally assume you get 1 level after each part of the arc. But you could certainly slow that down. And you could certainly increase that to, it requires 2 adventures in order to level. And that way you have room for 2 adventures and one main adventure and 1 subquest. The other one is you could still say there's still value in doing these other adventures, but you make it clear the characters are going to level up when they do these big ones. And then you just say, like, hey, you're just not going to level, and hopefully the players aren't so fixated on leveling that they're still willing to do quests, even though they're not necessarily getting quote unquote experience for those things. But another way is you could just slow down leveling. If you're doing the pacing of leveling yourself, you could decide, hey, they're going to get a quest, they're going to get a level after each quest. And that would work well. And that's probably what I'm going to do. So you can, those are hopefully some options for how to handle focused campaign arcs while at the same time offering options for other quests. If you enjoyed this show and you want more stuff like this, the best thing you can do is subscribe to the Sly Flourish newsletter. You can find a link down in the show notes. You get a free adventure generator for signing up, and you get a weekly RPG-related email that has links to all of the other things that I do all over the web. You can also become a patron of Sly Flourish. Patrons get exclusive access to all different kinds of tools, tips, tricks, adventures, sourcebooks, and everything else. Hero tier subscribers now get access to these new City of Arches, Key of Worlds adventure paths, and the Readings and Reflections podcast. Patrons get tons of stuff. I love giving stuff out to patrons. It's really, really useful. And to the patrons, thank you so much. And of course, you can pick up any of my books, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, Lazy DM's Companion, Forge of Foes, new calendars that are all available in the Sly Flourish bookstore. Links to all of that are in the show notes below. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and get out there and play an RPG.